The Las Vegas Aces travel to Brooklyn to play the New York Liberty. It's the second regular season matchup between the WNBA's super teams. I've got Matthew Walter here to break it all down. The Locked On Women's Basketball Podcast. It starts right now.
Ogunbowale for the win.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.
Hello, welcome, and happy Friday. You are locked on to women's basketball. I'm Jackie Powell. I'm one of your Friday hosts. I cover the New York Liberty at the Next, which is going to be incredibly helpful on today's show. And I help with our social media strategy, and I've covered women's basketball nationally at many other places. We want to thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. And remember that Locked On Women's Basketball is brought to you by everyone at the Next, a place where we cover women's basketball all the time. And we tell the stories that need to be told every single day. Also, we've been breaking records here at Locked On Women's Basketball. I think we've had over 100,000 views in the last month. And so that's all thanks to you, dear listener. And remember, Locked On Women's Basketball is free and available on all platforms. That includes YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and many more. Last time I was on the show, it was 2 weeks ago, and I had Annie Constable on. We talked about what she learned from WNBA All-Star, which was held in Las Vegas. And we also discussed what Dwayne Wade investing in the Chicago Sky means not only for the Sky, but for the league. And then we talked about the future of All-Star when it hits Phoenix next summer. But today, I've got Matthew here, who is our Las Vegas Aces beat reporter at the Next. And we are going to preview this must-see matchup that will be televised on ABC this Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific. Will the Aces win their ninth straight? Or will the Liberty get revenge on their budding rival and give Vegas their third loss of the season? So this is how we're going to do this. In segment 1, we're going to revisit what we learned from that first matchup back in June. Segment 2, we're going to talk about what has changed since June 29th. And then in segment 3, we're going to do keys to the game, X factors, and of course, we're going to predict who is going to take game 2 of this matchup this season. So Matthew, hello, welcome. Thank you for allowing me to go on and on with that intro. I guess I'm going to pivot to you and start by saying, what did we learn about these two teams and about this matchup on June 29th?
Well, I think what we learned from that matchup is, at least from the Aces perspective, it's just another game. And I know everyone wants to say, oh no, they saw it as this big momentous occasion. They're playing the other super team. They were asked about 8 million times pregame, and they, Kelsey Plum said it's just another game, right? Like, we can't treat it any differently than you would treat, every game, whether you're playing New York or Connecticut or Atlanta or Los Angeles or wherever. Like, you have to treat every game the same, and that's how they were treating that game. And Becky Hammond said the same things with the idea of, this is a popcorn game, right? Everybody's going to get their popcorn out and want to watch this game, but we have to treat every game the same and focus on us and focus on the things that we can control. And the Aces did just that, right? And that was really the weekend where I think a lot of people realized, the Aces played New York on that Thursday. They played Connecticut on the Saturday. They dominated both games against the second and third place team at the time in the league and said, okay, we're clearly, they showed they were a step ahead of the second and third place team. And at that time, right, the Aces were rolling. They'd only lost, I think, one game all season, and they were playing with their best players at the time. And obviously things have changed since then. Mm-hmm. But the Aces showed when they focus, when they play their best brand of basketball, when they're all locked in, which they were from, the first tip of that game onward, you saw, especially, they came out of halftime, they went on the big run. They never really seemed like they weren't in control of the game, and they did a lot of different things, right? They forced some turnovers, a lot of turnovers actually, which led to a lot of points in transition, and they got a really balanced scoring attack. All 5 starters in double figures. No one really took, an excessive amount of shots for Las Vegas. 12 for Candace Parker, 12 for Kelsey Plum, 10 for Gray, 11 for Young, A'ja Wilson only with 9, but they did the things they needed to do. All 5 starters, 14 or more points. They got, they only got out rebounded by 4 points, and they shot 58% from the field. So those are the things that when the Aces are playing their best, that's what they do. And they did it, and one of their best showings in that game against Liberty the first time.
Yeah, that's absolutely what we saw on the Aces side. I mean, when I saw that game, reporting on it from the Liberty perspective, I actually flipped back to look at the schedule. The Liberty 2 days before played the Connecticut Sun in Connecticut. And so you have to remember, when you make that trek from Connecticut to Vegas, it is not a streamline, or it is not an easy trip. Rather, if I remember correctly, the Liberty had a layover in Atlanta and were in traveling mode for around 13 hours on that day in between. So while Sabrina Ionescu has spoken a lot about how scheduling and the travel plight of her team, it shouldn't matter, it shouldn't be an excuse, nobody cares, it still can be a factor. And the Liberty did not look awake. They did not play their best basketball. They did not take care of the ball. As you said, they turned it over 17 times. And a lot of that came in that third quarter, where the Aces just scored a barrage of points in transition. But what I do think was really indicative of where the Liberty were in that first game was how they weren't really able to move the ball and get their other pieces involved. It was a lot of, let's try to find open looks for Sabrina that maybe didn't go in that night. Or let's try to get the ball to Stewie, see what Stewie can do and what Stewie can create. I remember the Aces put 2 on Stewie. Alysha Clark sort of led that attack and making Breanna Stewart really uncomfortable. And so the Liberty didn't really move the ball in the way that they're capable. And they were sluggish and tired, turned the ball over. Jonquel Jones was at maybe 50 to the player she is. You were there, so you could speak upon this better than me, but it seemed like the Liberty were really flabbergasted by the whole miss 2 free throws and free pizza, that whole thing. Because I think it happened to Jonquel when she was at the line. And it just, Breanna Stewart spoke about how loud it got in there once JJ missed both of those free throws. Is that what you remember?
I mean, that's how it is for anytime that is a consistently running Aces promotion. Anytime a player misses 2 free throws in a row in the same trip to the free throw line, you get free pizza from a place that is almost maybe a 10-minute walk from the arena. And they do this every game, and there is an excessively loud crowd. The first one, if you miss that first one, the second free throw, you cannot hear. You can't hear yourself think. And it happens every game, and I think you can even hear it on the TV of a broadcast. I was watching the broadcast against Atlanta the other day, and you hear it. And I think that's a huge advantage for the Aces. They've done a great job of marketing that specific campaign, and it really messes opponents up because, every time, especially for the Aces, their best bet is hoping it doesn't happen until the fourth quarter, right? Because if it happens in the first quarter, people aren't going to be as focused on it. But when you get to the fourth quarter, if it hasn't happened yet, they're still going to be as loud in the fourth quarter because they want the free pizza as they were in the first quarter.
I think this happened, if I remember correctly, I think it was in the third quarter. I could fact check that, but I remember looking at frustrated expression on Jonquel Jones's face. And, we'll talk about this more later in the show when it comes to the benefits that fans can provide. But I think it was Nafisa Collier who said on Haley Jones's most recent Sometimes I Hoop podcast, she was asked by Haley Jones, so where's the toughest place to play? She didn't hesitate and she said Las Vegas. But anyway, in our next segment, we're going to talk about what has changed since June 29th, because there's been a lot that has changed in around, 6 weeks. But first, I do want to talk to y'all all about Ibotta. Finally taking that summer vacation that you've been planning but dreading buying all of the necessities before you take off. It's time to stop spending your hard-earned money without getting anything in return. Enter Ibotta. Ibotta gives you cash back on hundreds of grocery items, from produce to personal care to pantry goods, so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. Either link your loyalty account or upload your receipt after you shop and get your cash back. It's that easy. The average Ibotta user earns $120 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip. Or you could use your cash back to buy that flight that you've been eyeing, or that game that you've been dying to go to, just like the Liberty and the Las Vegas Aces, or the fancy dinner that you've been craving. Other apps give you points that don't amount to much, but with Ibotta, you get real cash back that you can cash out to your bank account, PayPal, or gift cards. You can earn cash back on hundreds of online brands and retailers too when you start with Ibotta, including Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta, and by using the code LOCKED when you register. Just go to the App Store or the Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app and use the code LOCKED. So, before we get back to our segment 2, we want to thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. And tomorrow on Saturday, our WNBA draft and pro player development scouting crew will return with their series WNBA retrospect. They'll be doing a historical scouting evaluation on the one and only Lauren Jackson, the legendary Aussie herself. All right, so Matthew, let's talk about what has changed for both teams since that matchup on June 29th.
The biggest change for the Aces has obviously been the loss of Candace Parker, right? Candace Parker went out with foot surgery. There was a foot injury that showed up after an ankle injury showed up, completely different feet, right? So she had a right ankle injury. She had the left foot. We don't know what kind of foot injury it was, but it was enough that she had to have surgery on it. And we don't have a timeline for her return. She'll be out for a long time. She will not return by Saturday. That I can guarantee. And then obviously the Aces have been without Raquana Williams. She was out with a lower back injury. And then, last week she was arrested for a domestic violence incident and is not with the team right now. So she did not play in that first game. She obviously is not going to play again here against Liberty, but it's losing Candace Parker, who was a starter in that last game, who, like I said, was one of the 5 starters with double figures, who was actually one of the 2 leaders in shots attempted. She actually knocked down 3 3-pointers and was actually starting to play some of her best basketball with this Aces group around that time. So, and to hear that she's, dealing with that foot injury while playing through all this is even more impressive from the, soon to be Hall of Famer, but just one other player there without. And obviously that's a big deal because she is, one of the best players in WNBA history and still a great player, even at this advanced age that she's at.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because having Candace out, it almost feels like the Aces return back to their 2022 postseason run lineup because they've brought Kia Stokes in as a starter. But the difference is who they have filling in that former spot that was held by Raquana Williams. Matthew, I know you wrote a piece about this, but can you sort of describe to the listeners, I guess, how Alysha Clark's role has maybe opened up a little bit more since Candace hasn't played?
So I think the biggest thing for Alysha that's opened up without Candace is she's playing a little bit more positions, right? But even when Candace was playing, she was going, she can play 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? Because she's a bigger guard, and you talked about it. She guarded Stewie in that first matchup, and I asked Becky about it after the game the next day at practice. There's no one better to guard Breanna Stewart, right? Because they were teammates for such a long time. So Alysha Clark is just such a perfect fit for the Aces because of her versatility, because she can play inside and guard post players, because she knocks down the three at such a high level. She actually is great at posting up smaller guards around the basket, and she's just so smart, right? She doesn't really need, like the rest of this Aces team, there's no ego there. She doesn't need to score 20 points a game. She doesn't need to, she'd be fine if she scored 2. She just goes in there and she works hard. She wants to be a leader on the defensive end. She plays the right way, the smart way, and having someone like that as your sixth player is almost understatedly valuable. Like, it's so hard to put into words how valuable she is. And they talk about, every player on this team, like, we'll talk highly of every other player, but I just don't think people outside the Aces organization give enough credit to how valuable Alysha Clark has been to this team. And from every aspect, offense, defense, chemistry, you name it, she's just fit so perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, I hopped on to some of the Zooms this afternoon, or on Thursday, yesterday, previewing this matchup. And I asked Jackie Young point blank, I said, so how exactly does Alysha Clark impact this defense? And, as we know, Jackie Young is, she does not always have the most to say, but she gave a pretty long answer just talking about Alysha Clark's impact. And she just spoke about how much she's learned from Alysha Clark, how much things change when Alysha Clark is on the floor. And to be quite honest, I think she's a huge reason as to why the Aces have the number 1 defense in the league. It's because the intensity that she brings to that side. Because I think an issue for the Aces, and you could say this better than I can, in 2022 is sometimes their buy-in defensively. And when you have someone like Alysha Clark, who is always bought in on the defensive end, it sort of spreads to everyone.
Yeah, 100%. And you're right. I mean, that's all Becky Hammon talks about in any pregame, postgame. She doesn't talk about offense because she knows they'll score somewhere between 85 and 100 points most nights. It's, can we get stops and can we win quarters, right? And you do that because you're not going to, you will probably, the Aces will most likely score 85 to 100 points a game, but there will be a one game where just shots don't fall. It happens. Not everybody's going to shoot 50% every game. It's just not, very plausible. And so she talks about, we got to win every quarter. And a lot of times that's winning it with the defense. And Alysha Clark is such a big, caveat to that, and her consistency and her leadership for someone who, again, like I wrote in the piece, for someone who hasn't played with this team for more than half season, she looks like she's been there 2, 3, 4 seasons just because of her ability to step in and just play her role so well. And again, she's a veteran. She knows what to do in this league. And because of how she's developed and grown from where she started to where she is now, she just is going to go in there and knows what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And she's healthy too. I mean, it was really tough sort of seeing her sign that 2-year deal with the Mystics, and she gets hurt for the first year of it. And then the second year, she really isn't, the player we all know her to be. Because in 2020, in the bubble, she was the defensive player of the year. I know it was given to Candace Parker, but that was Alysha Clark's award, at least I thought. But anyway, it's interesting that we sort of talk about the how Vegas has changed with New York. How I can describe it is more, you're sort of seeing the roles of the other players in the starting lineup and on the bench start to take form. For instance, Jonquel Jones, her role since the All-Star break, I mean, it has gotten larger. They have been more intentional about finding her and about exploiting those mismatches. It's interesting because without Candace Parker, you have guarding Jonquel Jones, it's most likely going to be Kia Stokes. And while I know you've written, Matthew, that Kia Stokes has done a very good job in the role she's been given, will that allow the Liberty to stretch her out? Will JJ get a lot of looks on the perimeter? Bring Kia Stokes out of the paint? Will JJ be doing a lot of high-low? I don't know, but JJ now is playing more like 85% of her MVP self. She was playing at 40 or 50% in June. So that is something that has changed for the New York Liberty. Also, I did want to bring up the wonderful Sabrina Merchant at The Athletic wrote a great piece basically saying, how can other teams beat the Las Vegas Aces? So far, only 2 of them have done it, in the Connecticut Sun and the Dallas Wings. And so one of the things she said was, to beat Las Vegas, you need to have players who can disrupt and make A'ja Wilson feel uncomfortable. And so with Jonquel Jones not performing in the way in which we know she can perform, I just wonder, will A'ja Wilson, who, let me pull up in that last game, or if you have it pulled up, Matthew.
Yeah, A'ja in the last game, honestly, it was not one of her better games. 16 points on 6 of 9 shooting, only 3 rebounds. So that's probably an area she would like to improve. But offensively, 16 points on 6 of 9 is very efficient for her. And she's coming off, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 straight games of at least 20 points.
So I just wonder, with Jonquel playing more up to her potential, how does that change things? We're going to have to see. But that is definitely a change that the Liberty have gone through. It's that they are finding Jonquel in mismatch opportunities. They are establishing her, so that opens up space on the perimeter. Also, something that I saw from the Liberty is that Sabrina Ionescu, in the first half of the season, they were running a lot of actions for her to just shoot and just be strictly the 2 guard. They weren't really having her facilitate and get Courtney Vandersloot off the ball. That is something that Liberty have done. They've improved upon. Sabrina Ionescu has also played with Betnijah Laney, so she knows where to find Betnijah Laney, and we've seen it. Betnijah Laney has, when she's been really good, she's been incredibly efficient. She's bullied smaller guards. I mean, it was funny. Chelsea Gray actually said in the Zoom, she's like, people are going to be excited to see the Asian Stewie matchup, but they're also going to be really excited to see the Jackie Young Betnijah Laney matchup, which was so interesting because when you think about those two, they're actually quite similar in just sort of how they function and the types of builds that they have. So I'll be really interested to see how that matchup functions as well. And the last thing I'll say about how the Liberty have really changed since June is that, or actually there are 2 things. One, they're using their bench a little bit more, which I think is something I do want to ask you about the Aces bench in a moment. But the Liberty have been experimenting more, bringing Jocelyn Willoughby out onto the floor to guard the perimeter, especially when Betnijah Laney needs a rest. Sometimes they put lineups where they have Jocelyn Willoughby, Kayla Thornton, and Betnijah Laney on the floor at once. Offensively, that's a little rough, but defensively, that's worked quite well, especially against the Atlanta Dream. So I expect to see the bench a little bit more involved. And I also expect to see Jonquel Jones and Breanna Stewart protecting the paint a little bit better. I remember in that first game, they looked a little confused, especially when you have, the Aces slashers, putting pressure on the paint and putting pressure on the rim. Jonquel Jones and Breanna Stewart didn't really know, wait a minute, do I need to help Sabrina Ionescu because she's being hunted? What do I do here? How do I rim protect? There were a lot of issues there, and those have been cleaned up a little bit. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm just saying I've seen signs of improvement. So Matthew, let me ask you, when it comes to the Aces bench, has there been anything besides obviously Alysha Clark and Kia Stokes that's changed on that front?
I think with the loss of Candace Parker, we're seeing a growing role for Kirsten Bell. And I thought that might happen this year. And early in the year, she came in early in games, and then she sort of wasn't playing as much. And now with Candace Parker out, she's been playing more. And if you look at it, since the All-Star break, she's played at least 11 minutes in every one of the Aces games, and is coming off the best game of her career against Atlanta on Tuesday. 18 minutes played. She had 15 points, knocking down 3 3-pointers, 5 of 9 in general. And I asked Kirsten just about her role and about growing, and she talks so much about, I need to be better on defense, right? That's her number one thing. We know she can score, right? She was a scorer at Florida Gulf Coast. She clearly can put the ball in the basket. That's not a question. But she needs to get better at defense. And Becky Hammon has said she has worked really hard on becoming a better defender. She has really worked hard on improving that part of her game because she knows that's what she needs to do to get on the floor. And I think with the fact that they're playing Alysha Clark a little bit more versatilely, especially playing her at the 4, that opens up some minutes as the backup wing to Jackie Young. Now, Jackie Young doesn't want to come out, like a lot of the young Aces players don't want to come out of games. But when you do come out, somebody's got to come in and step up. And Kirsten Bell has been playing more minutes, and Becky Hammon has shown a trust in her to play her, 11 to 15 minutes a game, which is what the Aces need from her, just to come in, give them a rest, and just play good defense, right? So we know she'll score if she's open, but play good defense and sort of bring that side of the ball, because that's obviously what Becky Hammon is always striving for the Aces, is to play good defense.
Yeah. I mean, I saw that stat line from Kirsten Bell. I was like, oh, okay, all right. But I also do have to ask you, like, let's say Kia Stokes gets into foul trouble. What happens next? Do the Aces, is there any chance we see Kayla George or even Alana Coates, which was sort of a surprising hardship signing?
I would say no. The likelihood, unless, because they trust Alysha Clark to guard everybody's 1 through 4, then no, they'll just go small, because Alysha Clark can play the 4. And because of her versatility, the bigger issue would be if both Kia and Alysha got into foul trouble, or Kia and Asia got into foul trouble. Then we might see Kayla George. But I think with Alysha Clark being able to play guard 1 through 4 and guard Stewie so well that she did in that first game, she'd probably be the first out of the game will be Kia coming out and Alysha coming in. And they'll push Asia down to the 5, and Alysha Clark will play the 4. And I fully expect that to happen at some point in the game, because it seems to have happened every game since Candace Parker has gotten injured.
Yeah. Oh man, it's really interesting, because obviously the criticism I had of the Aces last year was just their lack of bench depth. And it was quite miraculous that they were able to be healthy for so long in 2022, and that they were able to do what they did with, so little help on the bench. And so it's interesting to see sort of year 2 of the Becky Hammon era. There clearly is more of a trust in the bench, but as I said to our fearless leader, Howard Megdal, it was maybe a month or so ago, the one edge that New York has over the Aces is in the capable bench depth. So we'll see what happens. All right. So in our final segment of our wonderful preview, we're going to get into the types of fun that lots of folks like to get into when you preview a game. And that means predictions, but we're not going to get to them quite yet. First, what I want to discuss are what are the keys and what are the X factors to, well, for you first, Matthew, to the Aces winning this game. And then I will take New York, and we will discuss the hell out of this.
So I would say for the Aces, the keys are do the things that you continue to do well consistently, right? Like be a good offensive team, play consistent defense. Just don't try to change things because of who you're playing, when you're playing, because things have changed, right? They've been successful doing what they do. Don't change that. Like just keep being who you are. trust your team, trust what you've done. And I don't think the Aces are ever a team that's going to see a moment that's too big for them, right? They've won a championship. They've all been there before. They know what it takes. And I think the moment is, never going to be too big for the players who start and who play for this Aces team. And then the second key is, I would say, guarding the Liberty at a high level, right? You said the first game, the Liberty came in tired. Well, now they're at home. Now the Aces have to make the cross-country travel. Now the Aces don't have a bunch of games coming up, right? They just played Tuesday and they don't play again until this matchup on Sunday. But the Aces need to guard, right? And that means you have to limit Stewie, you have to limit Sabrina, and Jonquel's playing better, so you got to limit her, right? There's a lot of weapons on both these teams. So it's being consistent, keep doing what you're doing, continue to be good on offense, right? Play smart, don't turn the ball over, all the stuff that you've done well this year, and then you have to guard. I mean, Becky Hammon doesn't hammer it home because she's a really good coach, right? She's been doing this a long time. She knows what she's talking about. And she hammers defense because she knows how important it is for this Aces team to win.
Yeah, I mean, Sandy Brondello says it. I mean, you need to be able to defend in order to put yourself in a position to win a championship. I think there's that cliche where it's like defense wins championships. I think it's sort of shifted a little bit, especially in the NBA and now the WNBA spaced out era. I think it's more offense is what is going to win you those championships, but to be able to get to the championship game or to get to the championship series, you have to be able to defend. If I don't know, I could be saying something that makes no sense, but I feel like that cliche has altered over the years and sort of the way that the Aces have been built, and you could argue the Liberty have been built. That's sort of the case here. What are the keys for the New York Liberty? What a great question. So I think it's really about moving the ball. And I know that sounds so simple. But the Liberty have the highest assist percentage in the league. I believe it is in the 70s, 77%. When they move the ball, really, really good things happen. When you move the ball, you also force rotations. You want to force the Las Vegas Aces into some uncomfortable rotations. I think the X factor is also Marine Johannes. And the reason I bring her up is because there have been instances where she hasn't looked comfortable or she hasn't looked engaged. And that's when they just sort of let her sit on the wing. Marine Johannes is someone who comes in. It's really funny. Becky Hammon actually calls her lightning in a bottle because Marine Johannes just sort of plays with her finesse, her European flair, and she just sort of makes things happen. Like you don't always know it's going to happen. She could do something on one leg, or she can be incredibly theatrical with what she does, and she somehow makes a pass or makes a shot. But getting Marine Johannes involved, it means that the Liberty are moving the ball. It means that they are passing the ball. It means that they're not just reliant upon two-player actions with Courtney Vandersloot and Brianna Stewart, or Sabrina Ionescu and Brianna Stewart. So if Marine Johannes is involved, that means that they're moving the ball. And if they move the ball, you're getting the Aces to rotate, and you're getting the Aces to have to defend harder than they usually do. And also, if the Liberty are moving the ball, especially in the half court, then that means Liberty are slowing down the pace. And as we've said, and as we know about the Las Vegas Aces, they thrive on being able to just push the ball. Chelsea Gray thrives on being able to just dump it out to Asia, who's like right near the basket. And when Asia's right near the basket because she's run the floor, it's very hard to stop her. So that's a key / X factor. I do have one more to add, and I don't know if you have another one. Do you have another one?
Yeah, I didn't get to my X factors. I would say my 2 X factors are, number one is Kia Stokes, right? We talked about she needs to guard. And, you say she has to be pulled out to the perimeter. That's actually one of her better places at guarding. The Aces switch a lot of ball screens. And I asked Becky Hammond, I said, you put Kia Stokes out on the perimeter a lot to guard, and you trust her? And she goes, yes, I trust her emphatically with her length. She has gotten very good at guarding guards on the perimeter. I don't think her being pulled out to the perimeter is something that's going to bother her. But you're talking about guarding and rebounding, the things that Aces have struggled with at times, defense and rebounding. Kia Stokes needs to play her role against Jonquel Jones at a very high level. And Kirsten Bell. The Aces need to get some scoring from the bench. They're going to get something from Alysha Clark, but they need to get something else. And if Kirsten Bell can find some confidence from that performance against Atlanta on Tuesday night and can just roll it through to the rest of the season and just build confidence playing 11, 12 to 18 minutes a game, she can be a huge, huge factor for the Aces down the stretch just to add one more consistent weapon, consistent player in the rotation. Those are two players, I think, super big X factors. Can they get a good defensive and rebounding performance out of Kia Stokes? And can they get 6 to 10 points out of Kirsten? I'm not asking for 20, 6 to 10. Just enough to make her a weapon, make her somebody that the Liberty have to guard and take some pressure off of other people.
Oh, yeah. That will be interesting to see. My other X factor is the New York Liberty fans. And I know this sounds less basketball and less X and O, but as I said earlier in the program, Las Vegas Aces, when the opponent is at the charity stripe, those fans are loud. Those fans make it so hard for an opponent to play because they want their free slice of pizza. I'm not saying that the New York Liberty should do that, but what I am saying is I'll be really curious to see how the New York fans show out, especially since they've been anticipating this matchup for a long time. There was this video where Ari Chambers sort of played Billy on the Street, or WNBA version of Billy on the Street. She was asking all these Liberty fans about the potential Las Vegas Aces rivalry, and one of them was like, oh, we're going to beat that team in the West. So I'm really curious to see how those tensions are going to play out in the arena. And can the Liberty fans make it tough for opponents to come to Barclays Center? That's something I'm going to want to see. That's really something that I'm going to be really curious to see. Now, prediction time. Matthew?
You want me to go first?
Mm-hmm.
I would say I will take the Aces. They've not played a lot of single-digit games this year. I think this one will be in the single digits. I still think the Aces win it pretty solidly. They're not going to win a one-possession game. I would say they'll win 6 to 8 points. I'll go 90 to 83. I just think the Aces, they average 94 points a game. So you're going to hold them under the average, but even without Candace Parker, they haven't taken a step backwards. And I think it's because it's basically the same group with the addition of Alysha Clark, who can play anywhere, to the same group it was last year. And they have no ego and they have no care about who scores. They just want to win. They all just want to win. That's all they care about. Just winning the game, and they trust each other and they really enjoy playing together. And I just think they're going to go on the road to New York and say, okay, it's just another game. We're here to win the game. And they're going to go out and win, by 6 to 8 points, 90 to 83 is what I would go with. Aces victory.
So my prediction is that the Aces will win as well, but I think it's going to be in a completely different way. I think this game is going to overtime. I think the Aces win at the last moment in overtime. I think this game is back and forth the whole time. I think the Liberty really took that first matchup personally, and I think they're going to be pissed after this. But they'll walk away with the confidence that they can compete with the Aces. And they did not have that level. Well, I shouldn't be speaking for them, but they walked away after that first game, and the reaction was, can the Liberty really compete with the Las Vegas Aces? I think that both teams walk away and the narrative shifts to, yep, Liberty can compete with the Aces, but the Aces still win. I'm going to say they win 105 to 103 in overtime. Boom.
We'll see which one of us is right when the game is over.
What if we're both wrong?
Yeah, the Liberty could just absolutely blow the Aces out. Who knows?
I mean, and the Aces could blow out the Liberty again. I really, to be quite honest, I am hoping for not a blowout.
I think a lot of fans are hoping for not a blowout.
Yeah, I mean, and it's really interesting because you said this earlier, Matthew. You were talking about how Kelsey Plum came into media just sort of saying, like, this is just another game. We're not really thinking about this rivalry. This is not what's on our mind. And I understand that. I do get it. But at the same time, when we think about the WNBA and we think about its growth and we think about what were the moments that sort of shaped this league, it came down to these matchups. It came down to Lynx versus Sparks. That was huge. That rivalry got the league on ESPN. So this is, yeah, I understand that both teams are competing and they want this to just be a regular game, but it's not.
I mean, that's what it is when you have two teams full of, super teams, right? It's never going to be just a game. But, I think everybody, the Aces treat it just like one game at a time, one play at a time, one moment at a time, because I think they learn from the experience of winning the championship last year.
Yep. Oh, yeah. And New York Liberty are trying to be the team that, matches up against them and poses a potential threat to them. I don't know. We will see. But that's been how this has been framed. So on that note, we thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. I want to give a huge thank you and shout out to Matthew for hopping on. Follow him on all the interwebs at Matthew Walter 96. That's MATTHEWWALTER 96. And please read his work on thenexthoops.com. And tomorrow, return to Locked On Women's Basketball, where our player development and scouting crew will be talking all about the legendary Lauren Jackson. I saw apparently on Instagram, I think Sue Bird flew out to Australia and the two of them got matching tattoos, or that was sort of what I saw. But anyway, they will be talking about Lauren Jackson and looking at some of her tape. But anyway, we are both looking forward to this very intriguing matchup on Sunday. But this has been Jackie Powell alongside
Matthew Walter.
And we are signing off.
Ogunbowale for the win.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.